Okay. Yeah, 4 o'clock. I'll try to speak up because the microphone isn't working. I was asked by someone to speak louder, speak more into the microphone last time, but that was over there. So hopefully, yes, thank you. Maybe we don't need to lock it, yeah, because some people may still arrive. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but it is loud.
Yeah, it's very loud. It's good to close it.
I don't know.
No, it's good to close it, just not lock it. Yeah.
They will see, I think. That
Yeah. All right. So let's start. Again, of course, very important to start with our motivation. Why are we doing this? Why are we studying this text? And we're still talking about great compassion. This is still the main topic. Now, in this part now, in this particular section that we're going to go through today, Lama Tsongkhapa also mentions a sense of endearment, Geshe Thupten Jinpa calls it, which is really affectionate love, what's usually called affectionate love. His argument is that, oh yes, all right, there's still some space there to lean against the wall. Oh, okay, good. All right, please, thank you. So the main argument is, well, first of all, Lama Tsongkhapa basically argues we have a natural tendency to want to be free from suffering. We have our mind naturally wants to be free from suffering. Now that being true, our mind also feels very close to the I. Our mental consciousness feels very close to, well, first of all, our mind, first of all, imputed an I, had the thought, this is I, right? That's how it's all started. So when I previously talked about it all started with the misconception and so forth, I was talking about the beginning of samsara, basically. But not every mind we have is a mind that is mistaken, or not every mind we have is an affliction. Basically, our consciousness, maybe in the first time after we were born in this lifetime, or sometime, I mean, it's difficult to point the first moment, it happens again and again, basically, but there's a moment when our mental consciousness thinks I, independence on the perception there is, independence on what the body does. So actually what there is are mind and body as the basis for a person, for ourselves. So if that's the basis, then the mind, on the basis of mind and body, then labels I. If you were to put away with that label, there wouldn't be any I. Right? If you didn't label I, then there wouldn't be an I. In other words, there is no self, there's no I that exists beyond the one that we label. But labeling is, of course, doesn't mean we're just making it up. Because this process of labeling, what does that even mean, labeling? It's not like labeling something on a tin, right? Labeling it beans or whatever. No, it's about thinking I. Seeing the parts of what we associate with the I, mind and body, there's the thought I. That is labeling. That's called imputing or designating or labeling the I. And that thought is dependent on the basis of imputation, mind and body. It's dependent on the label I, whether that's a word or any other symbol that you use in order to, or your mind uses to take to mind the I. Anyway, so it's dependent on the label, it's dependent on the basis of imputation, and of course the mind itself. So you need those three. A basis of imputation, the parts that we associate with the I, the label, which in this case is the word I, and the mind that thinks I. Those three you need. Therefore, it's not a random kind of process where one day you call a cow I, the next day you call the table I, and now you refer to yourself as I. No, because the basis of the invitation is very important. The parts that we associate with the I, mind and body. This mind and body, in other words. Right? So what does your mind do all the time? It thinks I. This morning when we got up, I. And again, I. Not just I, but I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'm known as this, I'm known as that. Whatever is, but it always comes up. So we keep labeling I on the basis of the 5 aggregates. But that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we don't realize is that if you take away, if we were to remove that thought I, there wouldn't be an I. Sorry, that's Yang Tirupuchi, I have to answer it. Sorry. Oh, that's the Tirupuchi. No. 담당가 진짜라 여기는. 러유. 주스 두발라 차그래. 나세 공단지. 나세. Translator didn't show up. Which is teaching in a center nearby. Anyway, so therefore, if we were to remove the thought I, our own mind's thought I, or any other person thinking you, for instance, well, let's leave others aside, because no one looks at us and thinks I, right? Only I myself looks at in my own case, I look at my own self and think I. No one else does that. So unless I were to think I, that I didn't exist. Therefore, beyond the label, before the designation, I doesn't exist. Okay? It's merely labeled. When we say it's merely labeled, beyond that labeling mind, or beyond that activity, that action of labeling, there is no self. But to our mind there is. Our mind first labels I, and then believes there's really something there coming from the side of the object. There's really something truly coming from the side of the object. In other words, there's the sense to my own consciousness, in my own case labeling I, with regard to my own mind and body. There's a sense to my own consciousness that I label this I because it actually is an I. There is something that's called I that exists beyond mind and body. That there's something that is naturally there, that doesn't need anything to exist. And I just happen to recognize it and therefore call it I. While it's actually the other way around. I recognize mind and body, then I think I, on the basis of this mind and body. There's certainly a connection, a karmic connection between between my mind and my body. They do exist together. From the day of my birth, they were karmically linked. Eventually that karma will be exhausted when I die. They separate again. But right now my mind perceives this union of mind and body, perceives of it as I, and therefore I exist. But as I just said, my mind is not satisfied with that. There must be more than that. There must be something from the side of the object. That's a little difficult to recognize. But maybe an example helps to illustrate that. For instance, let's take the previous president, one of the previous presidents, Barack Obama. Before he became the president of the United States, he was just an American. For us, we didn't know, if we didn't know much about politics, or even before he became well known. When we saw his picture for the first time, it was just some guy, an American. Yeah. And then he was elected to be the president of the US. So we start labeling president, right? Initially, it was maybe difficult because we were still thinking of the previous Bush. I don't know. Anyway, George Bush, right? So it was like President George. No, it's Barack Obama. So it took some time to label correctly in our mind, Bush, president. But before long, it seemed there was some quality of being a president coming from the side of the person. I didn't have to remind myself, oh, he's the president. It's like every time I saw him, there seemed to be some presidentness coming from the side of right? I'm taking this example based on what Geshe Thupten Pelsang said once, or the example that Geshe Thupten Pelsang once gave. This is actually a better example because it's associated with fear. He gave the example of the disciplinarian in a monastery, in a huge monastery like Drepung, for instance. Geshe Thupten Pelsang, he's one of the meditators who lives nearby, a great practitioner, a great teacher. But he was also once a monk at Drepung, and he knows what it is to be scared of the disciplinarian. Because if you have a monastery with thousands of monks, the discipline is important, and the disciplinarian, if you get caught doing something that's against the rule, you're in trouble. Okay. So the disciplinarians, they're elected every 6 months. Anyway, so when a new disciplinarian is appointed, an elder monk or a senior monk, then you need to get used to it. You need to know who's the disciplinarian to be able to avoid any kind of unruly behavior in front of them. You can get away if they don't see you, but if it doesn't see you, but in front of this person, you could get in trouble. So you need to really know who's the disciplinarian, be able to identify them on a moment's notice, right? So you keep labeling, okay, this is the disciplinarian, oh, this is the disciplinarian. But before long, you no longer need to label in the sense that, oh, you don't need to remind yourself, this is the disciplinarian. You see him and you go, oh, am I dressed okay? What am I doing right now? Am I doing something that's against the rules? And then before long, they change. The disciplinarian, a new disciplinarian is appointed. Maybe 2 years in the south. I don't remember. Anyway, in Drepung, I think it's 2 years. So for 2 years, they are the disciplinarian. They act as a disciplinarian, and then a new one is appointed. And when you see the old one again, there's still the sense of disciplinarian. Oh no. Now you need to relabel. Now you need to label the new one. But there still seems to be something from the side of the object. Some disciplinarianness, or for lack of a better word, some essence that seems to be coming from the side of the object. There's still fear. It still triggers fear in your mind. Because to our own consciousness, there's something coming from the side of the object. Right? Can you recognize that in yourself? I mean, imagine, especially if it's linked to this kind of fear of like being caught in I don't know, in some unruly activity. So similarly with the president, going back to the president, it still seems Barack Obama, some I don't know, something comes. Now it's the ex-president, but still, it's got still the word president. It's got still something there, and it'll be with him his entire life. So he's always special when he comes into a room. Ordinary him. Ordinary, right? It's almost like there's a light coming from. Of course there isn't. But this is because to our mind, there seems to be something inherent in him now that makes him the president. Or used to make him the president, but it's still lingering. Do you recognize that in yourself? That sense there's something coming from the side of the object. He's not just labeled. If you look for that ex-presidentness within him, you're not going to find it. It's merely labeled on the basis, of course, receiving the popular vote and everything that, but it's always in dependence on something other than himself. Oh yeah, on the basis of his mind and body is of course true, but mainly based on the fact that he has legally won the election. And still it seems there's something coming from his mind or body or both. Difficult to put your finger on. Of course you can't put your finger on it because it's not actually there. It's like if you look for it, you can't find it. Similarly with the I. We label I, and it seems like there's really something, well, I shouldn't say over there. Here, coming here, there's this I. It's there. And there's also a sense of continuity, because yesterday I thought I, this morning I thought I, and then later I thought I. And because I keep thinking I, and it appears to my mind to exist in and of itself, independent of my labeling, it seems there's a continuation, like an inherent, unchanging I, because I refer to it as I. So there's a sense, therefore, when I came into this room, the I that came into this room, and the I that's now talking to you is the same I. Don't you have the same sense? The I that came into this room. I'm not asking about your 5-year-old I. There's probably not a sense that your 5-year-old I and your present I are the same. We definitely have a strong sense of how the I has changed in that case. However, the I an hour ago and the I that sits here right now, it seems like they're the same. Right? Why? Because an inherently existent I appeared to the mind when you came into this room, or an hour ago. It appears now. And because they both appear to a mind in a similar fashion, it seems they're the same. Which is actually impossible, because the I an hour ago, it was labeled on the basis of mind and body that are not the same mind and body that we have now. The body has changed, the mind has changed. Because if my I were the same, or if my mind and my body were the same a minute ago, it would be permanent. If my mind and my body an hour ago were the same as my mind and body now, the same means identical, means I didn't change. Does that make sense? Therefore, that I, the way I perceive it, just simply doesn't exist. Okay? All right. Having said that, it still takes on that, I don't know, what's the word? It's like this larger than life thing, right? I like this expression, larger than life. I mean, yeah, life is life, but then there's me, there's I, living that life, enjoying that life, suffering in this life. So it's larger than anything, because it's the closest to my I, to my mind. It's the closest to my mind. So on top of perceiving it to exist inherently, since it's the closest to my mind, it takes on an extra importance, which then gives rise, that exaggerating, inflating, or that exaggerating mind that inflates the importance of my I, then gives rise to attachment to I, mine, especially my happiness, which is called self-centeredness, and controls everything outside too. That is in our way to generating compassion. It's so huge. It doesn't leave space in the mind, right? It doesn't leave space to focus on others. Now, first step is actually to generate that closeness towards others, to bring them as close to my mind as the I is to my mind. Right? Generate that closeness. Well, one effective step would be thinking that this other person or other people have been once so close to me, they've given me everything. For instance, if you're a parent, that's the advantage if you're a parent. you think they were your child once. Because most parents, although children no longer feel as close to their parents this time and age, but I think parents still feel as close to their children as they used to. I don't think that has changed. Therefore, at this day and age, if you have a child, that closeness to your child, you could now transfer it to other sentient beings, thinking they were once as close to me. And so there's no reason for me to think that they're not close to me now. That's one thing. Secondly, they're just like me. So exchanging myself with others. So put myself into their shoes, in other words. Think I were to experience what they experience. Right? Think I am them. Then right away my mind, when there's a problem, wants them to be free from it. Don't you agree? Because of our natural tendency, the mind's natural tendency to be free from suffering. So if your mind identifies with another person and you recognize they have a problem, it's relatively easy to think, may they be free from that problem. Therefore, those two, the natural tendency of our mind to be free from trouble and this feeling of closeness towards another person. Let's start with one person. All sentient beings asking a lot. But one person, that feeling of closeness towards that person, if you check, for instance, there are new methods now, and I really like these new techniques. You take these virtual reality goggles and you now becoming another person. That is, when you look down on yourself, you're this person, let's say a beggar. I've heard they're experimenting with that, I think in some university, I forgot where. But that's such a great use of these goggles. Think, you suddenly look down on yourself and now you're a beggar. You're a beggar in McCloudgunch, begging for money. With rags, okay, with the goggles you can't smell, like your own unwashed body, for instance. But that would be the next step. You can smell, your own, you don't have the chance to have a shower even. And you go through it from morning to evening. You wake up, you're cold early in the morning. It's cold, it's freezing. You only have a thin blanket. And then you feel like, oh, I need some tea or some coffee, or well, probably tea. So you want some, but no one wants to give you anything. They shoo you away. Like wherever you go, they chase you away. You're not allowed to come close to the chai shop. And then maybe someone like with this, what's the word? Disdain, like just kind of throws this cup at you, and you're like, you disgust, yeah. So you feel humiliated. But okay, you're having your tea. I mean, just that wants me to go there and just buy them a cup of tea and right? Because imagine, it brings tears to your eyes if you just think that 1 or 2 hours. But we're too busy with ourselves. We're too busy thinking of I, me, and mine to do these meditations. But really just take one person, one beggar, and think what it's like. If you don't have these virtual reality goggles, it's not that hard. Go to McCloudgunch, see where they sleep. I mean, probably not in some hotel, certainly not in some hotel, somewhere under a tree or I don't know. And think what it's like to go, what it's like. Morning to evening, right? Every step. That's a really thorough meditation. Or a person who's got some mental problems, or like I said last time, we start up with real problems, right? Problems that are worse than our own, and we imagine them. And all sorts of other problems. People have so many endless problems, whether they're rich or poor, but we never think about them. We only think of our own, because that larger than life I is totally in the way. Therefore, even before tackling that I by thinking of emptiness and so forth, we could just focus on that particular person and identify with them. So that then creates this closeness to our own mind and then thinking of their problems. Oh, may they be free from that problem. It doesn't seem that hard, does it? If you think that's the mind's natural tendency, and you've created that closeness already. And now you do it with others. And with one person, it's harder. It's like when you learn a first, second language, besides your mother tongue, that is hard. But the third and the fourth and the fifth, they're easy. There are people who know, like, I don't know, 12, 13 languages, because they said the first and the second language, that was difficult. And it became easier and easier. That's just how our mind, how our brain works. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So you take one person, you take another person, and it gets easier and easier and easier. And then the sense, all sentient beings, doesn't mean you need to know all sentient beings, of course not. But what does it mean? It means that you recognize what we all have in common, and that it's pretty similar. So whoever you take to mind, it becomes that immediate response because you're so used to identifying with others. In that sense, whoever it is, in other words, all sentient beings, whoever it is, of course you may want to include animals and other beings, but that is still just the suffering of suffering. And that's not that powerful. Therefore, we need to go back and look at our own situation from the point of view of samsaric suffering. Yeah, and that's not easy. That's another step that's quite difficult. But without it, without first generating renunciation, which is not saying I give everything up, I force myself to give everything up. That's not what this means. Rather, what it means is that I recognize the drawbacks of my existence, of what I'm missing out. Because I'm shortchanging myself. Is that a good word? Shortchanging myself. In the sense of like, I'm settling for something that is so minor, that is so ridiculous in terms of the happiness I can experience. Very, very short-lived, and not very strong. I mean, the happiness, the bliss and happiness I could potentially experience once I'm an arhat, it's nothing in comparison to my happiness right now. But not just that. Anything could happen anytime. There's no control. We're so eager on freedom, aren't we? I mean, if someone were now to tell you when to go to sleep, when to get, I mean, like being in prison, it's a terrible thought because we have no freedom to make any decision. But in comparison to an arhat, we have no freedom. We have no freedom to decide when we get sick or not to get sick at all, to not lose our job, to have enough money, to not grow old, to not die. All the things we don't want, we have no freedom. They could happen anytime. Just that really sucks, doesn't it? The lack of freedom. Anything could happen. So that is a way of looking at mind and body being so fragile, anything could happen anytime. So not only is our happiness very short-lived and ridiculous in comparison to that of an arhat, secondly, having this mind and body, if we're relatively well right now, it could get really bad. It could get really bad in the sense it could get, anything horrible could happen anytime. And then what? We die. Right? We have to give everything up. So in this lifetime, first of all, we were born to parents we didn't choose, to siblings we had no choice over. And then constantly things are changing. We cannot always be with the people we love. We have to stay with people we don't like. If we have any kind of high position, we have to come down from it, right? You may get really, really famous, but that will disappear at some point, at the very latest when you die. So great reputation, again, doesn't last. Nothing lasts. Okay, and then again, you get old, you die, and you do it all over again. Isn't that terrible? Like being a child, not able to move, not able to eat. Think of being a baby. Put yourself into the place of a baby, right? You're hungry, all you can do is scream. You're thirsty, all you can do is scream. And you have to learn everything from scratch, everything. Really put yourself in that position, right? What is it like all day long? It's fear. You probably remember how scary it was as a child. I was often very scared. My cousin's mother passed away when I was, even before I was born, actually. And my cousins were 8 when I was born, and they lived partly with us. So it was always in the back of my mind, your mother could die, right? Because my cousin's mother died. And they had a terrible upbringing because of that, because they had a stepma, and it was all very complicated and difficult, and yeah, they suffered a lot. So I was always scared. When my mom didn't come back, when she said she would, I was like, my mom died. And I knew it was not unrealistic. I knew this happened. So this fear you have as a child, and so many other fears, and then there's puberty, right? Then there's puberty. Oh my God, I don't want to go through puberty ever again. And high school, right? All the insecurities and the fear and not knowing what's going on, and really go through it, go back in time. And then finally it's over and you're free, you're 18 and that lasts and you party. But then again, and then you grow old and you die. I mean, I'm just fast forwarding. But really go through it. If you had to just do it once, it wouldn't be so bad, right? That's why Christianity is kind of like, yeah, just you do it once and then you go to heaven again. But just because people believe it doesn't make it true. I've heard once of a Buddhist monk who disrobed and he actually became a Christian. And he was interviewed by some Tibetan radio, like RFA or I forget. And so they asked him, why did you become a Christian? And he's like, I prefer Christianity. You only have one life and then you stay in paradise. I don't want to be reborn. As if that made it true. Just believing in heaven, that makes it true. I mean, anyway, even if you're born in heaven, you come down again. Therefore, if you really think about it, you want to do it over and over and over again, but there's no guarantee it's going to be as good as it was this life in relation to so many other humans. And we don't know whether we're going to be reborn in the human realm again. We could be born in the animal realm as a street dog. We don't know. Right? A really powerful negative thought at the time of death could be all it takes. We're relatively safe if we really make an effort to generate a lot of virtue throughout our life. But there are imprints, and we may have a powerful thought of hatred while we die, of the nurse, I don't know, who brings us cold coffee every morning as we lie dying or whatever. And then that's it. I mean, honestly, who wants to do it over and over again? One life, I'm okay. I don't complain. I don't remember past lives. That's why I make the same mistakes again. I wish I would. But then again, how frustrating. Well, it would be good for my renunciation, or it would be good for any renunciation to develop that. Because if I think, oh, I did it so many times, the things I worked so hard to get, I never really got them, and I'm still working to get them. Wasting my life. Right? Anyway, so once you do that, once you understand, wow, I don't want this, and there's a way out of it. There is a way out of it. That's the good news. And I wish it for myself. I want to get out of this. I want to get rid of the main cause that keeps me trapped in samsara. Then I can focus on others. And all these other beings, they're just like me. How terrible. And they don't see any way out. Unlike me, who's found the Dharma, who's found the different methods, who's encountered the different methods to at least free myself from samsara. They don't. I mean, even if they were to encounter them, they wouldn't like them. They wouldn't be interested. They would think it's just some weird religion from the East. Right? How lucky I am. So I'm fortunate. And now I need to do something. I need to do something for sentient beings. They're just like me. They were really close to me in the past at some point. But even now, when we're not that close, they're just like me. They're just like me on the deepest level. Their mind just wants to be free from suffering, naturally, just as my mind does. And then due to their actions in the past, they look different. They have a different upbringing. But it's only because of these actions that are exhausted and new ones are accumulated again. That's it. Right? So then it makes sense to generate compassion, doesn't it? For all sentient beings, may they be free from samsara and its causes. And even more so, from all limitations in their mind. And in order for them to be free from those, may I become a Buddha. To remove my own, but to now be able to remove the obstructions of others as well. Makes sense, doesn't it? It seems like psychologically, that's a natural way in which bodhicitta can grow. Because we utilize the nature of our mind, which is this basic wish to be free from suffering. That which we have in common with everyone, which we use as one of the reasons to generate compassion, well, that particular nature of our mind also helps us to eventually generate great compassion, bodhicitta, and based on that, then work towards enlightenment. Does that make sense? Doesn't? It does. Okay. Think about it. Let's meditate on that for a moment, okay? Sorry, the motivation was very long today.
At the start of what you said,
yes.
You mentioned to Jinpa and something about affection. I couldn't tie it to what
you couldn't tie it to that because I forgot to go further from there. Yes, you're right. Okay, I forgot that part. I'm glad you said, yeah. So I said that in this part that we're going to read today, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, or actually Lama Tsongkhapa, talks about endearment or affectionate love, as it's called. So that is one of the steps. So you have this closeness towards sentient beings, and the next step is then the sense of endearment. They're close to you, and not just this closeness, but also the sense that sentient beings deserve to be loved. Just as the sense of closeness towards myself naturally leads to wanting myself to be happy, I now have that sense of endearment towards other sentient beings, the sense of closeness, or I have to generate it basically. So there's a sense of closeness, and then I meditate on the fact that sentient beings are just like myself, and they deserve to be loved. They deserve to be cared for.
Just as they are.
Just as they are. Because on a deeper level, not just on the superficial level, which is the result of their afflictions, which is the result of their karma. No, on the deepest level, their mind is just as pure as the mind of a Buddha, because none of the afflictions are in the nature of their mind. They all have the potential to become just like a Buddha, and therefore they deserve to achieve exactly that, right? But actually, the sense of endearment, it's really just the mind that feels all sentient beings deserve to be loved because they're just like me, right? Maybe I need to say one more thing about that since you brought it up. I mean, that's difficult to do initially because we look at the superficial aspects of others. We look at a person who started a war and the incredible suffering, for instance, they create for those involved in the war. But if you put yourself into their shoes, right, and think, wow, they're driven by this attachment to power. They think it's going to give them lasting happiness, when in actuality, they're creating so much future suffering for themselves. I mean, how lonely do they have to feel to be in that situation? This is not condoning what they're doing, but it's just saying how terrible that they are controlled by something that so greatly harms them. Indirectly, of course, they harm so many other sentient beings, and it's important to have compassion for them. But now our focus is on this person who's created so much suffering. Would I want to be that person? That's the first question to ask yourself. And the answer is no way, right? No way I would want to be that person. And then it's much easier to think, wow, how terrible. May they be free from all this greed, all this hatred, all this confusion, thinking that could bring anyone happiness. Does that make sense? And so there's almost a sense they're like a confused child. As we can love a child, right? We can love a child, seeing through that kind of mess they have in their head, sometimes, I don't know, caused by whatever, but the sense of warmth towards that child. So we can generate the sense of warmth towards that person, wishing them sincerely to be free from all the terrible things they're doing, and therefore all the suffering they're mainly creating for themselves. Right? Does that make sense? It's hard, I know it's hard, but we also perceive that person, of course, as inherently bad, as inherently evil, and that's again our obstacle on top of. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to pack in too much into just this motivation. But anyway, let's take a moment to meditate along these lines. Maybe leave out the terrible person starting a war. But just in general, to think of sentient beings the way I just said. Having no control, since they're under the control of all their afflictions. In particular, self-centeredness. So let's generate the sincere wish for them to be free from all their sufferings and its causes. And let's also generate the wish, may I be able to help them to overcome all their suffering and its causes. And since we can effectively only do so once we first attain the enlightened state of a Buddha, let's generate the aspiration to become fully enlightened for the benefit of each and every sentient being. And so with this, let's recite the prayers about letting go of that mind of enlightenment. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. All right. Now going back to the text, illuminating the intent. Last time we read verse number 4, or we've been going through verse number 4, and it actually has 4 subdivisions, if you like. Number 4 has 4 kind of sections. First of all, what causes living beings to wander in cyclic existence? That's how it starts. Telling us, well, there's the misconception of reality, perceiving I to exist inherently, which then gives rise to perceiving mine, that which is mine, to exist inherently. Both of them being described as identity view by Geshe Toben Jinpa. He calls it the identity view, which is just one or two. These are just two types of the different types of misconceptions, root misconceptions. As we heard in the beginning, the root misconception refers to our mind perceiving inherent existence. And that can be focused on any type of object. It can be focused on persons, it can be focused on things other than persons, on anything. And it does so. We perceive everything to exist inherently. But there's a special focus on the identity view, which is another way of saying the view of the transitory collection, which is the literal translation of the Tibetan. The view of the transitory collection, which is basically saying we perceive of ourselves as inherently existent on the basis of a collection of aggregates that are transitory, that are constantly changing. On the basis of this mind and body, I view myself to exist inherently, and I view that which is mine to exist inherently. And both these minds are described as identity views, or views of a self based on a transitory collection. Now that's just a technical kind of jargon that is used, but what does it tell us? Watch out of all the misconceptions. Watch out in particular for this misconception that perceives the inherent existence of I and mine. That's the worst. Because that is mainly responsible for, of course, the exaggerating mind that now inflates the importance of I and mine, and the resulting attachment that attaches itself while inflating the importance of I and mine, that is attached to I and mine, which is just another way of saying self-centeredness, which then gives rise to all the other afflictions. Okay, so that causes us individually. We all have our own identity view, our own view of the transitory collection, which is not looking at the I of any other person, not looking at the mind of another person, only at our own I and mine. And in the case of the first, the identity view grasping at the I, well, it just grasps the I as inherently existent. The second one it gives rise to, the mind that grasps at the inherent existence of mine, it also grasps at the inherent existence of I, of that which is mine and the I. The I as kind of the utilizer of that which is mine. So as an inherently existent utilizer. There's actually a quote from someone who is called Ketrup Dendarwa. Ketrup Dendarwa. So he says, so the mind, so you have the self-grasping identity, it focuses on the I and grasps at the I as established by way of its own characteristics, while the mind-grasping identity view, that grasping at mind, focuses on the I and grasps at it as established by way of its own characteristics as that which utilizes that which is mine, ear, eyes, and so forth. Does that make sense? Right? So here, this person called Ketrup Dendarwa, in his analysis of middle way tenets, he says the I, the self-grasping, so you have the self-grasping identity view and the mind-grasping identity view, for lack of a better word. So the I-grasping identity view just focuses on the self as existing inherently. The second one focuses on the I as existing inherently as the inherent utilizer of that which is mine. Right? So in other words, it focuses on the I as the inherent utilizer of the inherently existent mine. So it grasps at both, at an inherent I and at inherently existent mine. Okay, has both. But the point is, it is an identity view. It's a grasping at an I, because in both cases it focuses on the I as existing inherently. Okay, and this author Ketrup Dendarwa, he's the textbook author of the texts that you study at Serame. In every college, you have the three main Gelugpa monasteries, Drepung, Sera, Ganden. And they have each 2 colleges, and in each college they follow certain scriptures. They all follow Lama Tsongkhapa, and of course Lama Tsongkhapa, Gyaltsabje, and so forth, and Nagarjuna. They follow all of the same text, but they have their own individual philosophical texts that they also study, that explain the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa and so forth, these great masters, and they're just slightly different. So anyway, this one is Ketrup Dendarwa, and I just thought this quote was maybe interesting, or maybe helpful to hear what exactly this identity view means. Okay. Anyway, having said this, now the first section here is what causes living beings to wander in cyclic existence. That was just explained. And then how do they wander in cyclic existence? What happens? How do they wander in cyclic existence? Well, basically, as we've heard, there is the 2 identity views, the 2 types of identity view that give rise to self-centeredness, that gives rise to the other afflictions, and then they're reborn in cyclic existence. So you have the 12 licks, for example. And then the next section is how they suffer in samsara. How they suffer in samsara. And that's described by way of the bucket, the water wheel, the bucket, right? Lower realms, higher realms. We had this discussion, what kind of water wheel is it? Is it the one with just one rope going down the well? Or is it the one with the many buckets all around it? Like I said, the way I've understood the example, the way it was explained to me, was just that one water wheel, which is called also a windlass. Isn't that also called a windlass? Wind, Y-I-N-D-L-A-S-S, like a windlass, I think it's also, anyway, or a cranking wheel. The point is that the wheel is attached, the wheel is like the consciousness, no, the wheel is like, the person turning the wheel is like consciousness, which is, and so it turns the wheel, which in turn is attached to the rope. That's like karma and afflictions. And I guess the bucket are we. So going up and down constantly. And then in the meantime, so the going through the various realms, which is like a bucket being lowered and lifted from the well. And then as the bucket rises and descends, it kind of swings and strikes the stone wall, leaving scratches, dents, and marks. So that's like in our lifetimes. As we're going from one life to the next, within each life, we're being, like bumped here and there, like against these walls, being scratched, being marked, being dented. I mean, we suffer. We have so many problems. It's not just that we constantly have to change bodies in higher states, lower states, and so forth, but we also have to experience all the problems that go along with it. And that is true for all sentient beings. So how do they suffer? In that way. And then we develop compassion by contemplating these first 3 points. Sentient beings are controlled by their identity view. Therefore, they constantly create karma and afflictions and karma and suffer as a result, which means if we reflect on that, we can generate compassion for them. I mean, if this is reality, this is serious, isn't it? Of course, we need to first come to the point that we're convinced in that. If everything looks so nice trees, nice hotels, good food, it doesn't really seem there's much samsara. But just because we're not looking, if we look back and forth, if we look around a little more and are not just obsessing over getting from one great meal to the next, and in particular as some people live their life, just like shun, like they don't look right and left. They're like, what do you call them? These like horses wear them. Blinkers. Like wearing blinkers, not looking left and right, and they're just concerned with one pleasure to the next. This is how most people live their life. They don't want to live right and left because it depresses them. But there's so much suffering just in this higher realm. That's the human realm. Yes, so anyway, having said all this, these are the 4 aspects that are discussed. So we basically went through the first 3. But what I wanted to mention is, the 12 links are part of this explanation. So I wanted to briefly go through the 12 links. I prepared something, and it's pretty short. It's not very long, so hopefully... volume is okay, good. Hopefully, it won't get too technical or anything. But basically, if you look at the drawing, so if you just look at the drawing that I prepared, or this kind of chart, the illustration, this shows you the traditional presentation of the 12 links. It's the traditional way that is usually explained. So in the traditional description of the 12 links, there are 3 lifetimes. 3 lifetimes are described. Of course, it's ridiculous to talk about first lifetime and second lifetime in general, because we've existed since beginningless time. But we can still take certain lifetimes and describe them as 1, 2, and 3. And these usually are said to occur within the desire realm. How do we know that? How do we know they occur in the desire realm? There are 2 indications. They're definitely not in the formless realm.
They have bodies.
Yes, because you have a body. How do you know that? By the link? Name and form. You have got form. Then, so it cannot be in the formless realm, but it can also not be in the form realm. What indicates, or what implies, which link implies it cannot be in the form realm? Which of the links here imply it cannot take place in the form realm? No, form. You still have, pardon? The 6 sense sources. Because you don't have all 6 senses in the form realm. In the form realm, you don't have smell and you don't have taste. It seems terrible. Who wants to be reborn in the form realm? I think I mentioned it in the very beginning. But actually, it makes life so much easier if you don't have to eat. So the point is, so in the form realm, you don't have all 6 sense sources. Okay? So but you could of course leave them out and you could adjust them. But literally when it's explained, like the explanation is usually done from the point of view of the desire realm, where beings are dominated by sensual craving and seek pleasure through sight, sound, smell, taste, and tactile sensations. That's the next point. It is seen as one very powerful link, which then gives rise to feeling, which gives rise to craving and grasping. In the form realm as well, in the form realm also, what is not the case is that beings are driven by this craving for sensual for sensual objects. They're very much absorbed in their different concentrations. They're attached to their concentrations, their concentrated states, but not to the external sense objects. And again, this is not the case the way it's described here. Anyway, so this is the desire realm where we live as humans, where you have desire around the celestial beings, animals, pretas, and so on. The 12 links, and that's important, provide a simplified framework that illustrates how a single karmic seed planted through ignorance and formative actions, or formative action, eventually matures through craving and grasping, resulting in rebirth and continued existence in cyclic existence. So you have in the beginning ignorance, right? Root misperception of reality. That gives rise to other afflictions, self-centeredness, anger, attachment, etc. And that in turn creates actions, certain actions. We act all the time. Even our virtuous actions are part of this here. Why? Because our misconception is ever present, right? Everything we do is based on our perception, the perception of an inherently existent I. So even virtue, we accumulate virtue, samsaric virtue, but it's still part of samsara because the root cause is still part of samsara. It's still samsaric, ignorance. Okay. All right, so in the first lifetime, which includes 2.5 links, ignorance, the fundamental misconception of reality, first link, gives rise to formative action. But here it's a particular karmic action which is very powerful. You usually have 2 types of karmic actions. One is called propelling karma and one is called completing karma. It's just a karmic action that is more powerful. It causes a rebirth. It's more powerful than a completing karma in that it causes a rebirth. A completing karma, not being that powerful in general, just causes all the experiences in that rebirth. So sometimes the analogy that is used is like having a drawing. The outlines of that drawing is like the complete, like the projecting or the propelling karma. It's like the propelling karma, and all the little details in that drawing is like the completing karma. So let's say, for instance, I created the karma to be reborn in the human realm. That was my propelling karma. There was a compelling karma that ripened in my last life, at the end of my last life, while I was dying, while I was close to death. And that propelling karma ripened in the form of this existence. But being female, being born in a particular family, in a particular country, all this was completed by other karmas, different completing karmas that also ripened at the same time. And then from the moment of my conception, I had different experiences in the womb of my mother, then later on as I was born, and all these experiences that I had, right, that led to certain feelings, positive, negative, neutral. They were all the result of constantly ripening, completing karmas, right? Different karmas ripen, they still ripen, they continue to ripen, and I continue to create new ones. Does that make sense? So karma is not like a concrete, unchanging thing that keeps me trapped in cyclic existence. It's rather the general name given to volitional actions that left something on my mental continuum and that are now constantly ripening in the form of my different experiences. In this life as a human being, it was a propelling karma that created my existence, or that is responsible for me being human. And then all the details, that's just the outlines, that was created by all these other karmic imprints, or by other karmas that I accumulated in the past and that I keep accumulating, and that now ripen in the form of my different experiences. But does that mean I'm trapped in that? I mean, the way I just make it sound, it's like I'm totally trapped in karma. I can't do anything because there's just this ripening of karma. No, it's not like that. I can still choose to act in a certain way, right? I mean, if someone now comes up to me and hits me with a stick, I can take away the stick and kill them. I could. I mean, I don't know whether I could, depending on how strong they are. But let's say they're not very strong, and they come up to me, and somehow a karma ripens that I'm now experiencing the pain of being hit with a stick. Well, I do have a choice to take the stick and hit them back, or maybe just hold on to it and try to calm them down. So there are different volitional actions I'm creating here, right? Yeah. Whether I'm successful or not, it's a different matter in both cases. But what I'm trying to say is that, yes, all our experiences are the result of karma. That's absolutely the case. However, within that, I still have a choice, and I can change the karmic actions. I can change them into more positive ones. That's the initial step. And of course, eventually work towards overcoming the causes of these karmas. Anyway, having said all this, going back to the 12 links, now having a sense of these two types of karmas, the second link is a formative action, which means here projecting karma or propelling karma. Here I call it projecting. Both words are called projecting karma, propelling karma. So it projects you into another rebirth, or it has the potential to project you into another rebirth, or to propel you into another rebirth. So that's a karmic action. But once the action is done, volitional action is done, it leaves a seed on the mind. It leaves something on the mind. Anyway, so a formative action, which is a volitional action strong enough to produce a future rebirth in samsara. Geshe-Thupten Jinpa, I think, calls it here volition, the second link. So it's a volitional action. This karma leaves a karmic seed on the mental consciousness where it remains, alongside countless other karmic imprints. Yeah? So they're all left on the mind. So imprints they don't have form. They're just left on the mind in the form of a potential. I don't know how else to call it. Vibration. Well, vibration is physical. The mind is non-physical. Usually we think along physical objects, right? But it's hard to really understand imprints. Yeah, we even give it the name of a physical object, like an imprint in the snow, for instance, or in the sand. But actually it's non-physical, and therefore there's no problem with our mind overflowing with imprint and no imprints fitting onto the mind. We shouldn't think along these lines. We can use, of course, physical examples like vibrations, but in the end, it's something non-physical, which is just a potential. Yeah.
The seeds is also potential. Right?
Yeah, the seeds are potential.
But what is the difference between seed and imprint?
What's the difference between seeds and imprints? In this case, they're the same. Imprint, the word imprint is used to show that something is left on the mind that makes a difference, right? Like when you leave an imprint in the snow, it's different to the untouched snow. Yeah. So the mind, after you accumulated this action, is not the same mind that you had before without that imprint. So some residue was left on the mind. Seed is talking about what happens in the future, the potential it holds, right? So an imprint is like something was left on the mind that distinguishes the mind, or that makes a difference now. You see, it's just, the word is just used from a different perspective. So You've left a residue on your mind. You left something on your mind. Yeah? That is expressed by the word imprint. And then when you call it seed, you give it the name seed, that is saying it has the potential to create something. So in this case, the same word is applied. It's an imprint and it's a seed. It's a karmic imprint, it's a karmic seed. In fact, they're equivalent. Karmic seeds and karmic imprints are equivalent. Yeah?
Information.
Pardon?
Information.
Information, yeah, if you would call it information. Yeah, it holds some information. Yes, yes, in the form of a potential. Yeah. Okay. This may be, okay, maybe this is, when I say imprint and I call it seed, it may be confusing to use two words for the same object. But actually it's not. This pen is impermanent and this pen is a functioning thing. So it refers to the same thing. Whatever is impermanent is a functioning thing. Whatever is a functioning thing is impermanent. But when I say it's a functioning thing, what am I emphasizing? I'm emphasizing that this pen has the function to create results, create its own results, its own effect, right? Which is a future pen, for instance. When I say it's impermanent, I'm calling it impermanent because I'm emphasizing that it's changing moment by moment. Right? So I apply certain terminology, although the terminology is equivalent. Whatever is impermanent is a functioning thing, whatever is a functioning thing is impermanent. But I use these two words because I'm saying two different things. I'm trying to point out two different characteristics of this pen. Changing moment by moment, giving rise to its own effect. Okay? Similarly here, I'm calling the karmic imprint an imprint to emphasize that something was left on the mind by that volitional action. The volitional action, let's say I steal something, powerful karma, I robbed a bank, very powerful throwing karma, or no, propelling karma, I should call it, or projecting karma. Now that action, once I robbed the bank, that's it, done. It seems there's nothing left, except, well, there's something left, there's a bank with less money, but other than that, it seems there's nothing. I've done that action. The action is complete, but actually something was left on my mental consciousness, and that's the imprint. That I want to stress. So I call it a karmic imprint. But if I want to stress that this karmic imprint has a potential to cause certain experiences in the future, I call it seed. Okay? In that sense. All right. Okay. Now continuing. In this case, however, the seed is activated. So there are many other seeds as well, but in this particular case, the seed is activated at the end of the second lifetime and ripens into the third. Okay, so in the second lifetime, at the end of the second lifetime, as part of this specific example here, the traditional way the 12 links are described, at the end of my second lifetime, which hasn't even started yet, we're still with the first lifetime, but it will be activated at the end of my second lifetime and ripen in the third. Okay. The mental consciousness on which the karmic imprint is left during this first lifetime is referred to as causal consciousness, which is the third link. 3a, the third link, the causal consciousness. Okay. So, therefore, in the first life, you have ignorance giving rise to particular formative action, projecting karma, which once the karma is just action, so the action is complete, it leaves something on the mind, an imprint, in the form of a karmic seed, which is now left on the consciousness that is described as causal consciousness. Okay. Then the person dies. So the continuum of consciousness that holds the karmic seed is then reborn into a second lifetime due to the ripening of a different karmic seed, one unrelated to the specific 12-link cycle we are discussing here. Okay? So a different karmic link. This is not discussed here. We'll later hear what happens exactly, why it ripens, but we're not there yet. We're still following that one karmic seed. We're just following it. So another birth is taken. The reborn consciousness is called resultant consciousness. It's still holding this karmic seed, but now it's the resultant consciousness. Causal because it was the initial consciousness that held the karmic seed in the beginning. Now it's called the resultant consciousness because it's a consciousness still holding the seed in the next life. Okay, it's just called that. Okay. It's still the third link consciousness. This second lifetime includes 7.5 links and illustrates how that same karmic seed remains latent throughout the duration of that life. Okay? It was created in the first lifetime. Until death, it lay there latent. Now the person is reborn in the second lifetime, the next lifetime, it still lays latent. So it's showing this karmic seed untouched, as long as it doesn't ripen or is not destroyed in any other way, it will continue to be there. That's just these imprints. They can just remain on the mind for long periods of time. So here, throughout the entire life, nothing happens to it. It just lies dormant, if you like. Okay. So this phase, this second life, also shows how in the second life, body and mind come together in the fertilized ovum. That's link number 4. Okay? It just shows, okay, first there is conception. And that is when in the womb, let's say it's a human birth, in the womb you have the fertilized ovum, name and form. That's already, so it's pointing out different things. It's kind of like an illustration of how the karmic seed continues, but it also shows us other things. For instance, name and form. It seems to be totally unrelated. Like, what does name and form have to do with anything? Certainly nothing to do with the seed. But it's also teaching us at the same time, if you are reborn, at the time of conception, your mind and your body have already been joined. It's just a fertilized ovum, right? It's just that blob, that entity of cells. It's more than the fertilized ovum. It goes before the body starts to change, before the body changes so that the sense organs start to grow, right? Just that, what do you call it, fetus? You would call it a fetus, right? That fetus is a living being in that it is the body and the mind joined. It's already that name and form. So that's how it starts. This is how every life basically starts. As the body develops, the sense sources such as the eye, ear, etc. form. That's the 5th link, right? They start forming. Once matured, these faculties engage with their respective objects, resulting in contact, the 6th link, right? So just in general, at some point you can see, at some point you can hear, you can, whether it's in the womb, outside of the womb, that's not the point. But this is what happens. We're in the desire realm. The sense objects, the sense engagement is very important. It actually controls our entire life, right? It controls our entire life. If we don't have pleasant sense objects to a certain degree, I think we probably kill ourselves, right? If we're always cold or always hot, we always feel scratchy, we're always hungry, we're always thirsty, we never see anything beautiful, the sound is unbearable. How can you survive? The impossible. Yeah? So we do seek, at the very least, neutral, or even better, pleasant objects. And for that we need the sense organs. So these sense organs, which then, once they're matured, once they have developed, they then give rise to contact. Contact is basically being able to perceive objects, right? Perceiving sights, sounds, and so forth. Contact then gives rise to feeling, the 7th link. Contact is the 6th link. Then there's feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, which in turn triggers craving and grasping. That's in general. That's our entire life, right? Right? Okay, so this is just a general explanation. So we started off, okay, the fertilized ovum, then the 6 sense sources. They first had to grow, and then they become active. Wow, now our life becomes meaningful. We can engage in the world, sense objects. That leads to feeling. Feeling is so important, right? Leads to craving. If it's an unpleasant feeling, the craving to be rid of that unpleasant feeling. If it's neutral, the craving to overcome that stupid neutral feeling, let it be pleasant. And if it's pleasant, craving for more. Right? Do you notice? I mean, our entire life is very much controlled by that. That includes pleasant sounds, being praised, for instance, being, I don't know, people liking us and telling us good things. I mean, it includes everything we do in our life, wanting to be liked. How do we know that? Through our sense perception, whether they smile at us or not, whether they help us or not, whether they say pleasant things to us or not. It's all through the senses. And that triggers feelings, and they in turn, of course, craving and grasping. Even if it's grasping and I don't want this, right? Leading to aversion. Okay. But that's just in general. This phase also shows how in the second life, this is the general explanation of links 7 through 9, in particular 7 through 9, so feeling, etc. More specifically, at the end of the second lifetime, the being becomes aware of their impending death. This is now fast forward. You now fast forward, basically. You have this general explanation, but more specifically when it comes to link number 7, which is feeling, link number 8, which is craving, and link number 9, which is grasping, specifically, this refers specifically to the time when we die, our impending death. Dying is the process that moves you towards death. Death means the separation of body and mind. But before these two separate, there's a process of the separation, right? There's a process, and that's called dying. It can be extended over a few weeks, like a person lies on their deathbed and they're dying, or there's an accident and that process is very quick and death happens very quick. But whichever it is, there is probably a thought, maybe the thought, I'm dying. Maybe even when you think the person is already dead, they're not yet dead, right? That's important to understand. From a Buddhist point of view, if your heart stops, you're not yet dead, right? That's just part of that process. The consciousness is still active. I mean, the people who like near-death experiences, they come back from that and have very vivid descriptions of what they were thinking, of what they were seeing, right? So there's no heartbeat, there was no activity in the brain. They were clinically dead. And nonetheless, their mind had a lot of experiences. But because death didn't happen, it was a near-death experience. Yeah, even in English you would say near-death. So they didn't die, although they were clinically considered dead. So the mind was still working, and that shows that based on the Buddhist description, it makes actually sense that you still have time to have thoughts. It's a subtler type of mind for sure, but there's still the thought, oh no, I'm disappearing. Because of their deeply rooted attachment. You remember? I spoke about this self-centeredness, this attachment to I and mine is very deep-rooted, very deeply rooted, even on a subtler level. When it comes down to dying or surviving, sometimes we have no we cannot even think. We're just trying to survive. Even if that means we walk over other people. I gave you the example of that stampede. It happens because it's so deeply ingrained into our minds, so that it's even happening on a subtler level. Therefore, when we die, we're aware of that. We're aware of that. There's this, maybe the thought, oh no, I'm dying. But there's certainly craving, there's holding on to life. We hold on to life. We hold on to existence. That's just a natural reaction. Even if you commit suicide, even if you kill yourself, there is still that moment of there's no control. It's no longer the coarse mind that's in control. It's a subtler type of mind that's in control, and that mind is like holding on to, like life. First, it's a craving, which then gives way to grasping for continued existence. These final afflictions, craving and grasping, They serve as the conditions that activate the karmic seed stored on the consciousness from the previous life. Now, for whatever reason, this craving and grasping, that wish, it's craving and grasping for continued existence, it now triggers that particular seed. And why? That is extremely subtle. We don't know why. It's a little bit like, when you have like lots of seeds and one seed in a box of lots of seeds suddenly start to germinate. Because whatever, maybe there's some moisture near that particular seed or whatever it is, we don't know why is it particular seed, or you plant a lot of seeds in the ground and only one seed actually grows into a sprout and the rest doesn't. The rest does next year. We don't know why. So that's why it's called a karmic seed, I guess, as well, because it's like a seed, for some reason the right kind of conditions come together and then it starts to germinate. It gets activated. So anyway, it's at this point, the first karmic seed that we've been watching since the beginning, that was left on the mental continuum, that is now activated. So this activation is comparable to the germination of a physical seed. The activated karmic seed corresponds to the 10th link, known as becoming. You call it becoming. There's no becoming yet. It's giving the name of the result to the cause. Because that's now becoming, in the sense that that seed will now become a new rebirth. Right? There's nothing you can stop this now. Once that seed has ripened, cannot be undone. Which means the third lifetime starts. This activation propels the being into their next rebirth, the third lifetime, which begins with birth, the 11th link, and concludes with aging and death, 12th link, thus completing the 12th link cycle. And then I put this last sentence, which hopefully clarifies a little bit. Although links 4 and 12 also occur in the first lifetime, 4 to 12. So you only have 2.5, right? You have only, or 3, let's say 3. But number 4 to 12, they also occur. And also links 1, 2, 11, and 12 occur in the second. And links 1 to 10 in the third lifetime, they belong to different 12 link cycles. So you do have, for instance, as at the end of the first lifetime, you also have craving and grasping and becoming, but it's part of a different life cycle. And they're not mentioned here to avoid making the explanation too complicated, right? You have it's already complicated enough, right? If you were to add the other ones as well, it would make it so much more complicated. All right. So what we get from this, it's a really weird way of describing it, but it's actually ingenious. Think about it. The first lifetime, it stresses, it describes how a karmic seed was created, okay? Doesn't say much more, it just tells us it's left on consciousness. That's it. No more information because it gets too confusing. And then it's talking about in the next life, not telling us how or anything else, birth and all that. It doesn't mention that. No, it focuses on the fact in the next life you take on a body that is basically really just the beginning of a life, which are a few cells that are now conjoined with consciousness, right? And then, being part of the desire realm, now the sense organs need to develop, because everything revolves around our sensual sensations. Then once they're there, they make contact, there's perceptions that give rise to feeling, to craving and grasping, and that's our entire life, right? It all revolves around hearing pleasant sight, pleasant sounds, seeing beautiful objects, and so forth. That's what it's all about. Can you think of anything that you wish, besides spiritual development? Before we even met the Dharma, it was all around that. A good job, right? In the previous, we wanted, for instance, to have a good job, to have enough money to buy more sense objects, to have a good job, to be, successful, considered to be successful. It's not enough that we think we are successful. We want our neighbors and our family and our friends to think the same, right? Again, it has all to do, it all comes through the sense objects. And that success is reflected in the car we drive, and the house we have, and in the objects we own, and the kind of brands we wear, and so forth. It's all sense, all through sense objects. And there's craving and grasping. I mean, this is how the economy works. I mean, craving and grasping through the modern media advertisements very much tries to trigger more craving and grasping. Oh, I'm incomplete if I don't drive this car, if I don't wash with this washing powder, if I don't own this particular house, right? So that's very much emphasized in the second lifetime, plus the fact that the karmic seed continues on. And in the third lifetime, it's basically saying, okay, and of course, what happens at the time of death is very important, how at the time of death, feeling, craving, and grasping actually lead to now the activation of that karmic seed, right? That's also very much part of the second lifetime. And then in the third lifetime, it's like, okay, now it's ripened, you're born, and then you die. Although, of course, the other links are also part of that third lifetime, but they're part of a different cycle altogether. Does that make sense? So this is a speedy explanation of the 12 links. I hope it's clear. It is sometimes a little confusing, like, how did you get there? But this time at least I had remember I taught that to Shita without any illustration, and you said it would be good to have an illustration. I never forgot that. So this time I made sure I had an illustration. But this is what Lama Tsongkhapa is also mentioning here. He's saying, well, you have basically afflictions. What are the afflictions as part of the 12 links? How many afflictions do you have? What are afflictions? Craving. Then?
Aversion.
As part of the 12 links. Ignorance, very good. Ignorance, craving, and grasping. You have 3. Oh, you have 3. What do they give rise to? They give rise to karma. How many types of karma do you have here? Huh? 2. What are they? Formative actions and becoming. Becoming. What causes, which affliction causes the formative action? Formative action is link number what? Link number? Which of the 12 links is formative actions? Which link number?
Second.
Formative action? What is formative action? Which of the 12 links is formative action? 2. Right? 2. I thought I heard 7. Link number 2. What is the affliction that causes it? Link number 1. What is the other karma? Link number 10. Becoming, the activated karma. Which affliction causes it? Craving and grasping. Right? So afflictions cause karma. Right here. Ignorance gives rise to formative action. Craving and grasping give rise to that formative action now being activated. First, what creates the karma in the first place? Ignorance and all the other afflictions. But what leads to its ripening? Craving and grasping. That leads to the ripening of that action. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
How does it work to look at a positive example?
The positive, yes.
If an animal becomes a human being in the next life, how does that work? Is it a different ignorance, a little bit different ignorance?
No. Let's say you accumulate a human karma as part of the first lifetime, a virtuous karma. So there's ignorance, there's the misperception of the self. But that ignorance then may trigger a moral conduct. I will refrain from stealing, from killing, and so forth. I mean, we perceive ourselves as an inherently existent I. And if I, as an inherently existent person, want to be a moral person, then I engage in moral actions. Right? I can still, with a mind holding on to inherent existence, can still be a very morally inherently existent person, very moral, ethical, inherently existent person. This is how I look at myself. may I accumulate virtue. So then I'm reborn in the second life as an animal, right? For a different reason. I don't know, in the previous life I killed someone. As a result of that, for instance, I'm reborn as an animal, or whatever I did. So I'm reborn as an animal. Then at the end of the life as an animal, I have craving and grasping, yes, but for some reason I may have also had a virtuous thought just before that craving and grasping set in. Because we're not saying that although craving and grasping activate the karmic seed, we're not saying there are no other causes and conditions that also play in there, that also are part of that germination process. Mainly they're craving and grasping, because if you don't have craving and grasping, no seed will ripen. You're out of samsara. You're no longer reborn in samsara. Because having eliminated craving and grasping is another way of saying having become liberated. Therefore, you can still have the karmic seeds, but you won't get liberated. But in the case of the dog now, in the second lifetime, when they're close to death, craving and grasping will definitely activate that karmic seed. But if it's a peaceful kind of death, when they experience love, for instance, they're being loved at the end of death, and they have a kind of virtuous thought in whatever way, like having love. Well, may my owner be happy, for instance, or may they not worry, or whatever that thought may be, that then triggers a positive kind of karma, right? Nowadays, I think we've moved away from saying, oh, sentient beings, animals don't have any thoughts. When I grew up, it was like this sense, oh, animals, they're just instinctive beings. They don't have any thoughts. It's just instinct. But that's ridiculous. We can see animals help other animals. Some animals help other animals and some don't. So it's not like some kind of instinct they all share and they all do the same thing. It's not like that. They're actual thoughts, they're decisions. I mean, there are lots of videos of, like, I don't know, an elephant mother trying everything to free her elephant baby after it fell into, I don't know, a well or something, and trying different ways to help the elephant. So there's like a plan, there's like thinking, there's organizing. It's limited, yet still it takes place. Which is why a dog at the end of their life, which is also, I think, a very good reason if you have pets, to, when you know they're near death, make sure they're not scared, they're not aggressive, you make them as comfortable as you can. And that, of course, also applies to humans, because our death is so important. Craving and grasping will be there, but there are other thoughts that are responsible for triggering a positive kind of karma. We don't know exactly how that works, as I mentioned earlier, but still there is a certain degree of, no, not control, but there is a way in which we can, in our own case, not make sure, that's too much, but at least there's no certainty as such, but we can work towards trying to have a positive rebirth by dying a peaceful death, by generating positive thoughts, virtuous thoughts, generating bodhicitta, and so forth. Geshe Thupten Pasang once gave a teaching, and he mentioned his father, whose father comes from Nepal, from a border region close to Tibet, or border region to Tibet. And his father, I think, is a follower of the Nyingma tradition. Yeah, so the Sherpas, for instance, many of them follow the Nyingma tradition. He is not a Sherpa, but anyway, so his father very much was interested in practice, but also in POA, transferal of consciousness, where a Lama helps you as you die for your consciousness, like transfer of consciousness in the sense that it helps you to be reborn in the higher realms. And so he would always debate with his dad about this, because Geshe Thupten Pasang said the best POA is if you generate bodhicitta. The best POA, like, you don't need another Lama to do this and that for you, not knowing 100% is going to be successful, because even if the Lama is incredibly powerful, if your mind is negative at the time of death, it's not going to help. Therefore, the best preparation for death is to generate great compassion, generate bodhicitta based on great compassion. That's the best preparation, because in that way you're much more likely to activate a positive seed. We still have craving and grasping, but we have more than that, right? Okay, so in answer to Venerable Yandrin's question, therefore. All right. Okay, so with this, I wanted to explain therefore point number 5 as part of eliminating the intent, which is it's the explanation of the analogy, the 6 aspects of the analogy. Remember, so there's 6 of them described here, which is on page 57 in the Kindle version. It's 62 in the PDF, and 47 around 47 in the book. Now in there, it mentions number 5. There are 3 afflicted classes within the 12 links of dependent origination. The afflictions of ignorance, craving, and he calls it appropriation. Actually, I called it grasping. And then appropriation, yeah, like lemba, as in like wanting to appropriate in that sense. But it's in this case, it's also like a grasping, like a holding on. Then karma, namely volition or formative actions, which is a volitional action, and becoming, and afflicted birth, namely the 7 remaining links. All right, so you have afflictions, you have karma, and then you have the results. So these 12 links, which you can categorize into afflictions, karma, and the result of karma, they describe the first 2 truths. Truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering. What is part of the category of the origin of suffering? Which of the 12 links are part of the category? What does the origin of suffering refer to? Karma and afflictions. Afflictions and karma are what we call the origin of suffering. Now you tell of the 12 links, you take afflictions and karma. Link number 2, link number 10. No, link number 2 and link number 8 and 9. Those are the afflictions. They give rise to karma. Link number 2, link number 10. Right? Ignorance gives rise to formative actions. Craving and grasping give rise to becoming. And then those in turn, and all these together, they give rise to the truth of suffering. What are they? The remaining links. Right? That's the truth of suffering. This body, this existence, that's the truth of suffering. All right. Now the question is, how do we explain the 12 links by way of the last 2 sufferings, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path? What is the truth of cessation here in this case? How do you look at the 12 links from the point of view of the last 2 truths? How would you look at those 12?
How you stop it.
How you stop it. But what would be
Stop the ignorance.
the process? What would be that process? So there's a cessation. There's a cessation, okay. The cessation, without starting with the cessation, what is the truth of the path? How is that described here on the basis of the 12 links?
You stop one link. And
You
then
stop one link, which is which one?
ignorance.
Ignorance. You stop ignorance if you overcome ignorance. So basically the cessation is the cessation of ignorance. If you have the cessation of ignorance, then you have the cessation of formative actions, you have the cessation of all the other ones. Because if you don't have ignorance, you don't have the other ones. Right? You no longer create new karma. And you can no longer lead to the ripening of any past karma because there's no longer craving and grasping. So if there's no ignorance, there's no formative action. If there's no formative action, there's no causal consciousness, then there is no rebirth, there's no resultant consciousness, there's no name and form. Okay, so that's the cessation. So the path is basically the same. The path is, well, if you talk about the Eightfold Path or whatever, you look at the path, it's basically the 5 path by which you eliminate ignorance. You eliminate the root misconception. That's what Buddhist practice is all about. In order to remove the afflictions, all you need to do is remove its root. Right? So the antidote, the direct antidote to the afflictions is the mind that realizes emptiness. That stands in direct opposition to the misconception. In direct opposition in the sense the misconception perceives inherent existence. The mind that realizes emptiness perceives the opposite, lack of inherent existence. So the mind realizing emptiness directly, that's the vacuum cleaner. That is the direct antidote to the root misconception. And if you get rid of that, you automatically, no root misconception, no other affliction. If you don't have ignorance, there is no exaggerating attitude that exaggerates the importance of the I. Therefore, there's no self-attachment. If there's no self-attachment or self-centeredness, there is no aversion, there's no attachment to anything else, and that's it. Done. Just like that. It's easily explained, very hard to do. Right? It's difficult and it's hard to do.
Last difficult one, come on. I'll take a chance for this one.
Right, but I mean, actually, it's much more difficult to stay in samsara, actually. Right? That's even worse. That's much more difficult. So the point is, yeah, so here in point number 5, as part of these 6 features, well, now that is hopefully clear. Sorry, I want to definitely finish this part now. Ooh, it's a lot to go. Anyway, let me just read this. The comparison by means of these 6 characteristics is drawn not simply to engender an understanding of how sentient beings wander in cyclic existence. That's not the only reason. There's a purpose to it. What is it then for? Earlier was shown that those who aspire to enter the great vehicle, or the universal vehicle, must first generate great compassion. But, or however, it was not explained how compassion comes to be generated. Yeah, it's great to say be compassionate, be loving, but how? Well, that is on the basis of what kind of meditative cultivation. So here it is shown that great compassion for all sentient beings is generated through contemplating the way sentient beings wander without control in the cycle of existence. So what factor makes us revolve in such perpetual cycle? It is our utterly uncalm and undisciplined mind. That alone does it. So it's our mind right now. It's not calm. How can it be calm? It's disturbed by our afflictive emotions. Why is it undisciplined? Because it just allows the self-centeredness to run wild and just do its thing. Right? We are terribly stressed people. When we say that it disturbs our mind when we have afflictions, that's just another way of saying we're very stressed. We think of stress as like going to work and making our way through traffic jams and all that. That's no stress, right? It's only stress if our self-centeredness comes in and says, bloody hell, I wanted to be there early and I wanted to do this and that and I'm stuck in traffic and I'm wasting all this time. If on the other hand you're stuck in traffic and you put on a teaching by His Holiness and you meditate and you know, you're doing it really well, you don't want the traffic jam to end. So it's not about traffic jam and this and that. It's only our mind. Our afflictions are stress. Stress are the afflictions. If in a given situation, however stressful the circumstances are, there's no affliction active in your mind, you're very calm, there is no stress. So stress are the afflictions. It's an uncalm, a stressed, and undisciplined mind. Uncalm in that, it's stressed by the affliction. Undisciplined, we don't stop them, we just allow them to run wild. We're not even aware of them. Before we came to Buddhism, like, afflictions? What is that? Affliction? It's like a disease. I mean, we hear, like, I'm afflicted by a disease, like a physical disease, but we don't even use that word in that context. Negative emotions are not necessarily what we identify here, like being sad. That's not a negative emotion from a Buddhist point of view. That's not harmful. Grieving can be good, right? Can be good if someone dies and you have to grieve. You shouldn't suppress that. But anger, that is a negative emotion. That really harms us. That we shouldn't allow to just run its course. Does that make sense? All right. In what domain, in what manner do we revolve? From the peak of existence down to the hell of Avicii, we revolve without any interval when we're not in motion. So there's no time when we're not in motion. Owing to what causes and conditions do we revolve? It is through karma and the afflictions. Owing to demeritorious karma, that is negative karma, and its related afflictions, we revolve in the lower realms. And due to meritorious, positive karma of the desire realm, and unwavering karma, that's just karma that is part of the form and formless realm. There's still karma. So the karma of the different realms. I prepared an explanation of that, but I don't want to go into this now. So there are the different types of karmas that keep us in the three realms. We enter the first effortlessly, without needing to strive to take birth there. So in the lower realms, very easy to be reborn there. It's harder to be born in the latter, in the higher realms, since their causes require cultivation with great effort. Our self-centeredness does not support ethical actions, not to the degree as it supports unethical actions. In other words, with our self-centeredness, it's much easier to accumulate negative actions versus positive actions. We can, of course, accumulate positive actions on the basis of self-centeredness, but it's harder, right? This is as mentioned in the basis of discipline. The basis of discipline is a text on the Vinaya. It's called Vinaya Vastu. So it consists of many different sections. It talks about the monastic life and so forth, based on the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, the kind of discipline that's part of the Tibetan tradition. But basically, it also gives a lot of teachings on how to live a monastic life, what rituals to do, and so forth. But that's besides the point. Just to inform you what the text is, it was put together by different people, right? But it's actually attributed to the Buddha. So the rules and explanations are all attributed to the Buddha. Anyway, so in there, the Buddha says that the number of sentient beings who migrate from the higher and lower realms on their way to the lower realms are like the number of particles of dust that exist on this great earth. While those migrating from these two realms on their way to the higher realms are like the number of dust particles collected between the tips of his fingers. Right? So that's huge. I mean, it's so much easier to be born in the lower realms. And think about it. I mean, just thinking of the fact how many people are actually interested in Buddhist practice. I'm not talking about the millions of, I think it's 500 million Buddhists in the world. That's kind of the rough number. 400 million of them Chinese. But how many are actually practicing? Are actually studying Buddhism, right? Really studying about it. What is Buddhism all about? And then reflecting on it, and most difficult, putting it into practice. Yeah? So living a life in preparation for a higher rebirth. I mean, yes, there are definitely a lot of Christians who do prepare for high rebirth, for instance, Muslims and so forth. But there's, the number of humans on this earth, it's ridiculous in comparison to just the insects on this hill, right? I mean, the insects just in McCloud outnumber humans many times. So are they accumulating virtue to be... No. Just eat and are being eaten and eaten, So very difficult if you're once in these lower realms, like especially the animal realms, which doesn't just... We're not just talking about elephants and tigers. Yes, they're few in numbers, unfortunately, now. But there's so many other animals like insects. Are they working towards liberating? No. So therefore, in this world, yes, there are definitely quite a few humans working towards a higher rebirth. But they're not that many. And when it comes to liberation and enlightenment, the numbers drastically go down. And we are a total minority. We are a total minority, right? But a good minority. All right. Thus, we should reflect on the following. During the period of the activity of any of the 3 afflictions of the 12 links, so ignorance, craving, and grasping, of a single cycle of dependent origination, the 2 other afflictive factors, karma and becoming, pertaining to a different cycle of dependent origination, can come to operate, and so the continuity never ceases. Furthermore, we are tormented by the 3 classes of suffering on a daily basis, not just once, but constantly, like endless ripples of water. Right? If you think about this, look at it like a movie. Whoa, this rebirth, and their rebirth, and then all the suffering in between. At ourselves, we go, oh no, I don't want this. Renunciation. When we focus on other sentient beings, compassion. Right? Now, if someone experiences no effect whatsoever in his or her mind, when they reflect initially on the way they themselves wander in the cycle of existence, there's no way that such a person would experience on the beginner stage an unbearable concern for others when contemplating their suffering. You know, now first you need to understand it yourself what it feels like. We have a natural sense when we feel close to other sentient beings and we see them suffer, then we want them to be free from suffering of suffering. Because we all want to be free from suffering of suffering ourselves. Right? So that's why we naturally don't want other sentient beings to experience that which we usually call suffering. But with the other types of suffering, like even the very limited happiness we have, because we consider that to be something positive, even if someone is close to us, we don't want them to be free from something we like. We want them to have that. So great compassion cannot arise because we want for others. If we love a sentient being, if we love our samsaric happiness, we want the person we feel close to have that same samsaric happiness. Right? Yeah. Therefore, we first need to generate the wish to be free from suffering ourselves. Which is why it's explained therefore, just as explained in the commentary on the 400 stanzas, that is a commentary. The 400 stanzas, are you aware? Do you know this text? It's by Ayadeva. Ayadeva was the heart disciple of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna's closest disciple was called Ayadeva. And he composed a beautiful text. It's available in English. It's called the 400 verses or the 400 stanzas. It's available in English. It was taught by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, translated by Ruth Sonam. Very good translation. And it's got 400 verses, as the name says. So that's the name of the text. And Chandrakirti composed a commentary on that. So in there he says, one must first contemplate suffering in relation to one's own self. Then one should contemplate in relation to other sentient beings. Yeah, it's apparently in the second chapter. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I totally ignored the group. I spent too much time on the motivation today. My apology. I didn't want to go so much into it. So we've got a few questions here. Is karma referring to the B is asking? First question. Is karma referring to the action or the imprints left by the action? Is karma referring to the action itself, a volitional action itself, or the karmic imprints left? Strictly speaking, it's the action. But in the context of the 12 links, the meaning of karma is not as strict. Karma literally means action. So therefore we say the volitional action, that is karma, the imprint is not. But in some contexts, such as this one here, becoming, which is the activated karmic seed, is also called karma. Yeah. So sometimes the word karma, and also in everyday life, we sometimes give the name of the cause to the result. The name of the cause is the karmic action. For instance, let's say someone steals my purse, and I say, oh, that's my karma. That's basically saying that is my karmic, that is the result of the karma I accumulated in the past of possibly stealing some other person's purse. Possible, right? Someone steals my purse in this lifetime. Maybe in the 15th century or the 11th century, somewhere in this world, I was a pickpocket. Call it pickpocket. I was a really good pickpocket. Really good at what I was doing. So I would constantly, and then that karma, for whatever reason, ripens in the form of me having a bag that's open, I don't really pay attention. So the external circumstances are such that they also trigger this karma. If I hadn't accumulated that karma, my purse would still be there. Even if I'm throwing it into a crowd, someone would bring it back to me, right? Even if I were to drop my bag on the middle of the street, I couldn't lose it. Someone would bring it back to me. There's a really interesting story. One nun in our nunnery, she's usually very disciplined in the nunnery where I live in. So she's not someone, definitely not, she's a very virtuous person, let's put it that way, in her behavior. So one day she came back home into her room. She came back to her room. She closed the door. She didn't close the door. She left it open, went to the bathroom and washed her face. And someone came into her room and stole her bag with everything in there. That included a phone, the bag, some money, like a purse with money, and a few other things, I believe. And the funny thing is, to make it short, she got everything back because the person didn't realize there was money in one envelope. That's right, there was an envelope. So they threw away the envelope just near the nunnery. The kata, and there's also something else. It was all thrown there. Even the bag was thrown somewhere. In fact, I walked with a friend of hers towards McClarkganj one day, and there was a piece of just like some grass or something. And there was one other thing that was in her bag, and we found it. She had some kind of shopping bag that you can kind of wrap up and put in your... We found that because this nun I was walking with, she recognized it. So she got everything back except for her phone. And then, about 6 months later, the police called her and said to come to the police station. And they had all these phones put in front of a chair, on a table, and all their owners, because now the police has figured out a way, if you've got the number, like the original number of your phone, and you file a police report, they can actually retrieve your phone. They know where it is. They have some kind of app that you're not allowed to use except the police. Yeah, because she secretly used it. One of the taxi drivers had the app, but he was too scared to get caught. So she knew the phone was at some point in the building opposite the cable car, right? But anyway, the taxi driver was too worried, so he didn't follow up on it. But after 6 months, the police had actually retrieved all these phones. The point is, she didn't lose anything. Bit of a headache, but she got everything back. So she didn't have the karma to have something stolen from her. The karma to have some trouble, but not the karma to have something stolen, right? Okay, so therefore, the karma here, we sometimes say this is my karma, when actuality, it's really the karmic result we're talking about, right? It's a person's karma, means actually it's the result of that karma. And in this case, to answer B's question, is that here it's just called karma. It's not strictly speaking karma. So birth, becoming here is not strictly speaking karma. Oh my God, you guys, that you're not getting up slowly. The last question I answer, okay, and then we dedicate. Henele Okonen asks, so the karmic seed mentioned in the chart 3a, causal consciousness, is only ripened in number 10, existence or becoming. I called it becoming. Or is it 11, birth? Okay, so that karmic seed mentioned at number 3 skips one lifetime in the chart. Okay, that karmic seed mentioned at number 3 doesn't skip one lifetime, it lies dormant throughout that lifetime. So if you want to, if you skip, in a way you could say skip, but basically it lies dormant, nothing happens to it. Then when in number 10, as part of number 10, that's not ripened yet, it's just been activated. Yes, ripening happens at birth. wouldn't use the term ripened. It is ripening. You could say during link number 11, number 10, which is becoming. So that is just before death. It is ripening. It is activated. It is ripening. When has it ripened? In the new rebirth. It has ripened in the form of that new rebirth. Does that make sense? So it's like the sprout is like ripening is when the, when the seed is germinating, when it starts to get bigger. Yeah, you put water, it kind of blows up a little bit. Before the sprout starts to grow, that would be the germination process. And then when the seed has, the sprout has grown, it has ripened. The seed has ripened. Which means the germinated, that blown up seed, that is number 10, becoming. And the sprout is birth. It's conception in the next line. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That was pretty long. So that's as always. And the other questions I'll answer later. Well, they're not that many. Or maybe Mark's question. Why eliminating craving and grasping is not enough for liberation, as there would be no more rebirth? Why eliminating craving and grasping is not enough for liberation, as there would be no more rebirth?
Ignorance still exists.
Pardon?
Ignorance still exists.
Still, yeah, ignorance would still exist, which means craving and grasping would still exist. In other words, it's just not possible, right? It's not possible to eliminate craving and grasping without eliminating ignorance, because ignorance is the root. If you still have the root cause of something, that is like trying to eliminate the symptoms of a disease without eliminating its main cause. The afflictions are just the symptoms. Suffering, afflictions, they're just afflictions other than ignorance. They're just the symptoms. Ignorance is the root cause, so you have to get rid of that. If you want to cut a tree that keeps growing after you cut it, you have to get rid of its root, right? The root, you have to destroy the roots. And then there are certain trees or certain plants. Unless you get rid of the roots, you cannot destroy, you cannot get rid of the tree if it's like a poisonous plant or something. Therefore here, craving and grasping are like, let's say, the stem of that plant. You can keep cutting at it, but you never really get rid of it. It keeps growing again. You have to get rid of ignorance. Yeah. All right. Okay. So let's dedicate whatever positive potential, especially after such a long session, we have accumulated. May it become, of course, a cause for us to quickly attain the enlightened state of a fully enlightened Buddha, for the benefit of all sentient beings. But in the meantime, may it cause our great lamas, our great masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to have a very long and healthy life. And may it, of course, make a difference in this world, have a positive effect on those suffering from greed and attachment to power and so forth. So let's then recite the prayer. The prayers. In the snow-and-soaked land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. The brave Manjushri and also Samantabhadra realize things as they are. Hence, in order to be able to follow their example, I dedicate these merits in the best way. With the dedication praised as supreme by the victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate all these roots of virtue, that I might engage in the Bodhisattva deeds. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. I had a short thought as I was talking.